Hello and welcome to 18 WJTS-Inform. I'm your host, Bill Potter. Joining me in the studio is State Senator for District 48, Mark Messmer. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bill.
Well, this year, one of the big things going through the legislation is going to be dealing with education because it's a budget year, and education takes a great deal of the budget. But there's been a lot of news lately, seems to be that some conflict, I guess, over eliminating the state superintendent's job as an election. What is that?
Based on what you've been hearing in the media, what would you think how would you phrase the debate that we're having at the State House?
As I see it, most of it is that they're trying to eliminate having the state superintendent be an elected official.
Okay.
That's how I see it, but I don't know if that's true.
Well, how I've seen the articles written by the reporters from the State House and by the debate that I've heard, you as a citizen, your interpretation of what's happening is you've fallen into the trap that's being put out there of what's going on, what's being debated, and my wife would say too. She would say, reading the paper tonight, I would expect that you guys are trying to eliminate her job as superintendent from being an elected position
to being an appointed position. But that's not the case?
Not any bill. There is no bill dealing with her job as school superintendent who is the administrator of school policy and rules. There is nothing we have debated, nothing on the table, nothing being talked about eliminating her job as state superintendent. But that's exactly what you would think from the way the stories are being put out in the news media.
Well, then what is going on? What is happening?
Okay. After the superintendent Ritz was elected in 2012, and she started her office and her job in 2013. I'm not going to say it's her fault. I'm not going to say it's Governor Pence's fault. But the functionality of that school board that she's a member of. We have school boards in our county. We have a superintendent. I mean, each school corporation has a school board, and each school corporation has a superintendent. The superintendent, reports to the school board. In every school corporation, we have a state school board and a superintendent who is a member of that school board. And currently, as the legislature set up, the state superintendent, who is a state appointed, the state legislature created that position to help the day-to-day operation of school policy. Okay. She's a member of the school board currently. She is, the superintendent is automatically chairman of that board. All the members of the school board are appointed by the governor. There's 10 appointed members and one superintendent, making up 11 total, and all 10 members are currently appointed by the governor. Only 6 can be from one political party. The other, you can have 6 from one party, 4 from the other.
Okay.
So all of those members being governor appointments. Whether some of those members are at fault, whether that's a superintendent at fault, the reality is the last 2 years have been completely dysfunctional in getting any communication, any cooperation of work done at the school board level. A symptom that's popped up from that we've seen just this week, the I-STEP test. Last year we made some changes to our state standards. For 3 years they had been using Common Core. There's been some pushback, across the country and in our General Assembly about adopting all of the components of Common Core. Even teachers at the lower grade levels who were implementing Common Core said there was too many of the items in Common Core that were not age appropriate. When you're a Common Core standard, state, even if you disagree that some of the content was not age appropriate, you didn't really have any way to change it. So we are not Common Core, but we're 90% Common Core. I mean, we've picked out the parts we thought weren't age appropriate. It's basically, Common Core light, but we control the content. Well, when we made that change, then you've got to make some changes to the I-STEP test to make sure your standards and the test, are in sync. starting last April through, there was a September 2014 school board meeting where the members of the school board asked Carrie Wicker, who was working on developing the test for the state school board, asked her, in April, May, all the way through as late as last September, they asked her, what's the status of the I-STEP test? And her comment was, there's going to be a few extra questions, and that was about it. Now, and they had the option of, and as you change standards, you're supposed to run some pilot questions to make sure your changes are statistically valid, make sure that they're not, so they had the option of running a pilot test in the fall and then rolling out the full test this spring, but to give the Department of Education more time to write the test, they decided to do it all at the same time. Run the pilot questions with the full test, taking what was last year a 5-hour test for third graders, and then they also added a reading comprehension component to the I-STEP with the superintendent's goal of getting rid of what they call I-read, for the third graders, taking a 5-hour test out to a 12-hour test. Well, there's been some pushback, and understandably so. But that issue could have been worked out together with the school board to identify, problems, to get help in getting this thing worked out, months ahead of time. But because there was no communication, no working together, she did all of the changes unilaterally to the test, didn't take any input from board members. And then when they made the announcement last week, when they rolled the sample test out to the superintendents across the state, still without informing the state school board of what was going on, there was a large reaction of concern, and understandably. So that basically just typifies what's been going on. One of the state school board members, his name's Gordon Henry, Gordon Hendry, Hendry. He's a Democrat appointment to the state school board. He wrote a letter to the editor to the Indianapolis Star last summer in July, indicating that he thought the problem really laid at the feet of the superintendent, that she was being combative, unwilling to work together, and he'd been on the school board about a year at that point. He got appointed in 2012, and he's not a Republican who's just been appointed as a Democrat. They're both politically active Democrat, campaigners in Marion County, and he looked at it as to him it was a nonpartisan perspective of it, that he saw the problem of the lack of cooperation really coming from her, and wants help from the legislature on how to pull some functionality back together. So, and then that gets us to the Senate's view of this is what we're dealing with. We're trying to put together a comprehensive, rebuilding of that school board in Senate Bill 1, and we had amendments on that yesterday on the floor, and we'll probably have final vote on it on Monday. But that bill will go through the House the second half of session, probably go to conference committee, and we probably won't know the final every detail of it until April 29th or shortly before that. But our basic groundwork on that bill is to take the 10 gubernatorial appointments and reduce his amount of appointments from 10 to 4, and let the legislature, the Senate and the House, Democrat and Republican, have 4 appointments from the legislative body. Because if you read Article 8 of the state constitution, the responsibility, the power, the authority for developing school policy is with the state legislature, not the state superintendent, not the state school board. So we figure it's time to, if we reduce the governor's appointments to that board, and we have House and Senate Democrat and Republican, 2 Democrat, 2 Republican legislative appointments to that board, we feel like it's our policy that's supposed to have the rules then defined at the school board, And then the administrator of all of that policy is the superintendent.
Who would remain an elected position?
Remain an elected position.
Okay.
There has never been a bill, this entire session, no discussion about making that an appointed position. It's elected now. It'll be elected next year. And there was a House bill that got voted out, I think, Monday, that would have just, their only point of dealing with it was taking that automatic appointment of her as the chairman of the board off and letting the current 11-member board, elect their chairman. That was, their bill was one sentence. At the first meeting, in July of 2015, let the current 11-member board elect their chairman of the school board. That's it. It might be Superintendent Ritz that gets elected. And we feel like with our, and we've got a few other tweaks to that. We're going to require, if there's supposed to be a Democrat or Republican appointment, we're going to go back to their primary voting records and make sure they've voted in the last 2 Democrat or last 2 Republican primaries to make sure that it's not misconstrued, which political affiliation they come from. So we added that to the bill, and of that 9-member board, then they would elect their chairman. And one of the complaints this past couple years has been the current school board members don't get an agenda ahead of time and have no ability to discuss issues at the meeting that aren't on the chairman's agenda. And we've also got it, in Senate Bill 1, the ability, the chairman publishes an agenda 2 weeks ahead of time, and then you have up till a week ahead of time, the current other board members, if they want to add things to or take things off the agenda, they can send in their request. And at the school board meeting, they'll vote on what agenda items to add or take off, and it'll be a majority vote of the current board members to let that happen. So it'll give input to everybody on what's on the agenda. It'll reduce the governor's appointing authority, which will be a large reduction in his control of that board. Mm-hmm. If he appoints all 11 members, or all the 10 appointees, he appoints them all now. He can really influence the complexity and the dynamics of that board. And I mean, the current, him appointing all the members and the superintendent, I mean, that's probably been, part of the conflict is them fighting for control of what's happening on that. Well, we intend to try to make that board a functional body that takes the policies we enact and develops the rules and the day-to-day procedures. Because we try not to write 1,000-page bills that have all those details. We set usually basic framework, and then the board comes up with, okay, they want to do item A. To enact that, we got to they come up with the policies and the rules that it takes to put it into day-to-day practice, and then communicate. Then it's the superintendent's role to take those and get them to the 300+ school districts around the state. Make sure the superintendents and the school boards at every local level, know and have the information they need to put them into place. So nothing is going to take away her responsibility, her authority to be, the administrator of her superintendent's job. But you, like probably 90+% of the viewing public, would have expected that's what we were doing, but it couldn't be farther from the truth.
It's kind of more of a restructuring.
It is restructuring the school board, not the superintendent, not the Department of Education. Those were all created by the General Assembly to help enact. Since we have a part-time legislature, we're not there 365 days a year. Back when this was adopted, and up until the 1970s, the legislature only met every other year. So you needed somebody, to put those things, help put those policies into place and to work with the school, with the schools around the state to make sure that they had the help they needed and the direction that they needed, and so that's where we're at today.
Wow.
So we got done with amendments on that bill Thursday. It'll be up for final passage on Monday. reasonably sure that I'll support the bill at this point. It could get amended. It probably will get amended more. And if somebody decided to give it more time before it took effect, if that's the consensus that gets made as the process rolls along, that wouldn't surprise me. Maybe even some more refining of how many, and in the appointment process might get tweaked a little bit. Who knows? But that'll probably keep getting tweaked until the end of session.
Well, it's amazing
Exciting
sometimes
stuff.
and sometimes how confusing I guess it can be.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're out of time, but we're going to have you back next week to talk
Okay.
about other things that are happening here in the legislation.
Sounds great.
All right. Our guest has been State Senator Mark Messmer, representing District 48. Mark, thank you very much for coming. It's
You're
always
welcome.
a pleasure
Thank
to
you,
talk
Bill.
to you. Thank you for watching WJTS Inform. Join us again next week at the same time as we'll talk with Senator Mark Messmer again on 18 WJTS. Local people watching, local people.